British police, off our streets! British police, off our streets! Every year, and they are supporting an apartheid. Just to let free Palestine! Free Palestine!
On Friday, the government moved to proscribe Palestine Action, a group that had engaged in direct action against arms companies who were supplying weapons to the Israeli state that were being used to perpetuate genocide. Now, obviously, the excuse that they would offer for their actions would be that there is an obligation under international law, not just for citizens, but also for states, to do everything in their power to prevent genocide. That's an obligation, of course, that falls on our government. Now, of course, nothing I say at the moment should be read as me indicating any support for Palestine Action. They are, of course, a proscribed group. And that is, of course, what I have to say because the law forbids me from saying anything else. Which is exactly what protesters found out this weekend when they took to the streets holding up signs saying, quote, "I support Palestine Action." And one of the consequences was that an elderly priest was taken away. Here's a clip of that incident.
Why are you here today?
I'm here to stand up for the people of Palestine and the fact that this organisation is being said is a terrorist organisation, which is taken off, and that we are losing our civil liberties in this country.
You make us proud, auntie. Look after yourself.
So I think the reason it's fallen to 83-year-old women, priests, to take action such as this is because the consequences are just so onerous. How on earth could somebody with a job take action like this, knowing that the likely consequence is 10 years in prison, up to a maximum of 14 years in prison for supporting a proscribed group? Never mind the potential implications of having a terror offence on your record. Try travelling around the world, for example, when you have to get through passport control, and the checks that they do on you flag up a terrorism charge. These are really serious risks that these people are taking, and therefore I think you'd have to conclude, irrespective of what you happen to think about their opinions, that these people are taking a very brave step to defend our civil liberties. Now, one of the people arrested was a government lawyer called Tim Crossland, who managed to deliver a very eloquent speech as he was being dragged into the back of a police car. Here's that clip.
Well, this is what happens in modern day Britain for opposing genocide. It's quite something, isn't it? I mean, this is why the laws came in after 1945. The European Convention on Human Rights was to stop a genocide happening again. And now it's happening. I don't know, people have got short memories.
You want to go up next?
The mother of all democracies, people.
Now look, free speech is a nuanced debate, and I am not a free speech absolutist. But when we think about what kinds of speech need to be protected, the right to protest is right at the top of the pile. The whole point in free speech is that we as citizens have the right to hold the government to account, to hold those in power to account more generally, including corporations, for example, that hold a lot of power over us, to hold them to account for their words, for their deeds, for their actions. And so it is, for me, horrifying that scenes like these have played out on the streets of Britain. But of course these scenes don't surprise me. There has been a consistent trend in recent years for our civil liberties, and in particular our right to protest, to be eroded. This started under the last government with the Police Crime Courts and Sentencing Bill. Now this bill made it illegal to engage in noisy and disruptive protest. This was strengthened by the same government with the Public Order Act, which added on the crime of going equipped to a protest with equipment that could be used to lock on. So the laws in relation to protest have consistently got worse over recent years, And this built on top of an already pretty restrictive regime when it comes to protests in the UK. You can't even have a protest in central London without informing the police of it, without getting permission from the police to have the protest. Everything has to be planned in advance, and yet even when you try to comply with those requirements, as the pressure group Republic found out, on the day of the coronation, the police still might take action against you using these draconian laws to restrict the right to protest in the UK. So in some ways, J.D. Vance was correct to argue that there is a free speech problem in the UK, but it doesn't relate to the things he was talking about. It pertains to the right of people to hold the government to account for the most serious of things possible. So these things should be very, very worrying, and I want to draw attention to them today. Our free speech is under attack in a very serious way, and I very much hope that when these individuals take their cases through the court system, they'll have a massive amount of support for the public, because what they were doing was testing the state's willingness to actually impose massively onerous sentences for what really amounts to just holding up a piece of paper, to just holding up a sign. Now look, I know there's lots of people who will say that the right to protest has been abused in recent years by Extinction Rebellion, by Just Stop Oil, and that some of these laws have come in precisely to deal with some of the threats posed by some of these groups. Now look, I'd be more instinctively inclined to defend some of those actions, at least in terms of them being permissible, although I often think they're not the best strategies, because actually these tactics, as this discourse is suggesting, tend to alienate people from the cause that people promote. So actually, generally, I'm not a fan of direct action where you're trying to build public support. It might be different in cases where you're trying to directly disrupt things from happening, and to move away from the current example. An example of that might be where you lay down in a road to prevent people from being deported from your community. We've seen quite a number of actions like that happen. So look, I sort of have a view that, although I'm not advocating it, sometimes breaking the law needs to be permissible in a democracy in order to both sustain the rights that we have and to extend the rights that we have. And of course, the suffragettes are a good example of that. The Cat and Mouse Act was used against those protesters, bringing them in and out of prison, force-feeding them, really subjecting them to really horrible things. But they transgressed the law, and through their action, they won change in our society. And that is really how it's always been. We only have these rights that I think we take for granted sometimes because brave people have been willing to fight and sometimes to die for them. So I really think we've got to not be complacent in moments like this. This is a really serious moment. There's clearly a trend towards authoritarianism on the part of the government in relation to those that it deems that it can be authoritarian towards, because, let's face it, there will be significant public support for the action they're taking. Well, anyway, what do you think? Let me know in the comments. Do you think the police went too far? Do you think the government are right to be using laws like this to prescribe groups like Palestine Action? Be careful with what you say, of course, because you don't want to expose yourself to legal jeopardy yourself. But do you think the protesters were right to challenge the law? Is our free speech under threat in the UK? Let me know what you think. And don't forget, if you like my videos, to please subscribe to the channel. Maybe consider becoming a channel member. And for now, goodbye and best wishes.
We love you, welcome! Stop the genocide! I oppose genocide. I support rights for Palestinian people. Hold on! I support freedom of speech. I support freedom of
Guys, mind your
assembly.
backs. Move out the way, please.
Move, guys, watch yourself, it's a live road. Yeah?
Human rights.
Be mindful of the traffic.
I oppose genocide. I oppose genocide.
Hey, legs down, legs down.